Today we are observing Palm Sunday as well as Passion Sunday. Palm Sunday has the tradition of the waving of palm branches, the shouting of hosannas, and it's a festive service in the church year. What's interesting as we look at the reading of Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem from Luke's Gospel, we don't see any palm branches. John has palm branches, Matthew and Mark have leafy branches, but Luke does not have palm branches. But what's even more interesting is that there is no Hosanna. Matthew, Mark, and John all have the crowd shouting Hosanna. Luke instead has the people shouting out as Jesus passed by, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory to the highest heaven." The people are crying out for peace, but interestingly, peace in heaven. Jerusalem is the city of peace. The name means city of peace, city of shalom. And so here Jesus is entering a city of peace, and yet they're proclaiming peace in heaven. When the angels came, the angels proclaimed that the coming of Jesus at his birth was to bring peace on earth. And so we have this tension. Did Jesus come to bring peace on earth, or is there simply peace in heaven? As we look at Luke's Gospel, one of the themes in Luke's Gospel is the theme of peace. Jesus, the bringer of peace. Luke uses that word peace more often than the other three Gospels combined. And so it's a central word that occurs throughout Luke's Gospel. And what Luke is trying to say is, as we look and reflect on Jesus' activity throughout his 3 years of ministry, it is an activity of bringing peace to people's lives. When we look at that word peace, I think we think of it more often than not in terms of ending a war or a conflict between two nations, the bringing of peace. And yet for the Jews, the concept of peace, the concept of shalom was much more broader than that. For the Jews, it was a sense of wholeness. Peace was when your life was whole. And that looked at all of life. Your relational life, your emotional life, your physical life, your spiritual life, your financial life, that wherever there was discord in your life, God's intention was to come and bring wholeness, to bring peace, to bring shalom to your life. And what I find interesting is that Jesus continued to do this even as he went through the last 24 hours of his life. And so what I want you to do today is pay special attention as we read the story of Jesus' last 24 hours of his life, and specifically look at the places in his story of the trial and the crucifixion and death that Jesus is bringing peace. As I read through that, I came across 8 of them, different examples of Jesus bringing peace, and there might be more. It started at the Last Supper, and it's interesting in Luke's Gospel that Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper before he identifies Judas as the betrayer. This is different in Matthew and Mark, where Judas is sent out of the room before the Lord's Supper is given. According to Luke, the Lord's Supper was intended for Judas as it is for all sinners. In other words, I think Jesus is trying to bring a sense of wholeness back to Judas, who had betrayed him. And he wasn't outside of those who God, through Jesus Christ, could grant wholeness to. As we go to the Garden of Gethsemane, we see that scene where the disciple draws the sword. And Jesus says, "Put it away." Again, for Jesus, the sword is not the answer. The sword is not the answer to peace. Put the sword away. And then Jesus reaches out and heals the person who, Luke doesn't say who it was, John's Gospel said it was Peter, whose ear was chopped off by Peter. Again, as I said, wholeness concludes our physical life. And so here we see Jesus bringing wholeness again back to the slave whose ear was cut off, making him whole. Jesus also mentions on his way out to the Garden of Gethsemane how the kings lorded over him. And Jesus says, this is not the way it should be among you. Rather, it's a life of service. And of course, we know that kings and rulers always lead to war. Servanthood, though, leads to peace. Then as we continue, we find this interesting story about the trouble between Herod and Pilate. And Jesus is brought before Pilate. Pilate finds out that he's from Galilee. So Pilate sends him to Herod. Herod sends him back to Pilate. And then we read this interesting verse, which I guess I had kind of ignored. And yet it's an interesting verse where it says, that same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. Here at Jesus' trial, he's bringing reconciliation between two enemies, bringing peace in somebody's relational life. Again, an interesting example of peace. Then Jesus, as he's going out to be crucified, comes upon the daughters of Jerusalem, the daughters of peace. And what does Jesus do but offer them his concern and his compassion. Even as he's suffering from all what has been inflicted on him, he still has the heart to offer compassion, to bring peace to these daughters of Jerusalem. But I think the last two words from the cross, from Luke's gospel, reminds us again how much Jesus came to bring peace to the world. The first one is spoken to those who were crucifying him. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And most often this them is thought about specifically to those who were pounding the nails in Jesus' hands and feet. I read a devotional yesterday, and that's the take on that's who Jesus was forgiving, is those who were crucifying him. And yet I believe that the them should be interpreted in a much broader sense. Who is Jesus forgiving? Not only the soldiers, but also the crowd that hollered out, crucify him. Also Pilate and Herod, and Ananias and Caiaphas. Also the Jewish leaders. Also the Judas who betrayed him, and Peter who denied him, and the disciples who ran away. And yes, I think that them even includes us. That Jesus is offering to us forgiveness. And when we have forgiveness, it brings a sense of peace to our lives. Finally, we get to that last phrase, the last words from Jesus, where he speaks to the thief on the cross hanging beside him. Today you will be with me in paradise. Again, a word that brings peace. I've shared this before, but one of my tasks as hospice chaplains is to visit, especially those who have no church home. And what a joy, and it really is a joy, to again explain the message of the gospel, that Jesus' desire is to save all of us, to bring us home, to be with him in heaven. That if we believe in Jesus, we have that wonderful promise of life everlasting. And I have seen the sense of peace that comes upon people when they have that assurance that Christ will take them home to be with them in heaven. Christ's desire to bring peace to our lives. And so a little later on this morning, when you bring your nail to the cross, I want you to think this year of an area of your life that is in discord, an area that you need Jesus to bring peace. Maybe it's your emotional life, you're facing something that's causing you difficulty. Maybe it's spiritual life, where you're dealing with something you've done wrong, or with grief, or with shame. Maybe it's physical. Maybe it's financial. Maybe there's relational. Maybe there's a rift between you and other family members, or so you're having problems at work. Whatever your problem is, bring your nail up. Give it to Jesus. Let Jesus help you to restore the peace that he so desires in your life. Because that was Jesus' purpose, to come and bring peace to our lives, to bring shalom, to bring a sense of wholeness. And that can only happen when we turn our problems over to Jesus and let him take part in our life. Amen.